Hello everyone, my name is Taimur Rahman. Just yesterday I made a video called Is Marxism Communism Against Selfishness, the Ego, and so on. Well, I made the video in Urdu and some of the remarks were that people wanted me to redo the video in the English language. So here it is. You know, when I went to college, and that was in the United States, one of the earliest debates that I had was with my roommate. And we were both studying economics at the time. I did my undergraduate major in economics and political science. And of course, in the context of economics, we were looking at rational choice theory. We were studying rational choice theory. And in the 90s, this was a time when rational choice theory had already started moving out of economics and colonizing the other social sciences. Anyway, it raised an important question. And the question was whether it was human nature to be selfish. This, of course, is also very much part of capitalist ideology. And one of the criticisms made by those who are very pro-capitalist against those who are socialist. Those who are pro-capitalist often argue that capitalism aligns with human nature because it is human nature to be selfish, and capitalism is built on the profit motive, it is built on greed, it is built on being selfish. On the other hand, socialism or communism, Marxism, etc. Posits a view of human nature which is incorrect, wrong, which is that human nature is selfless, or that Marxism, communism, socialism wants humans to develop a nature which is selfless, and that such a thing is impossible because we all covet things, we all want things, and that's precisely why socialism failed in the 20th century, or arguably that's why socialism became a dictatorship and the totalitarian dictatorship in the 20th century, so on and so forth. In fact, this entire view is totally incorrect. It is a complete caricature of Marxism, socialism, communism to suggest that the main motive behind this entire effort, these movements, is to convert people from being selfish into being selfless. Let me quote from Marx and Engels. This is from the German ideology. They write, "Communists do not oppose egoism to selflessness or selflessness to egoism, nor do they express this contradiction theoretically either in its sentimental or in its highflown ideological form. They rather demonstrate its material source with which it disappears of itself. The communists do not preach morality at all." To continue, they do not put to people the moral demand, that is communists, do not put to people the moral demand, love one another, do not be egoists, etc. On the contrary, they are very well aware that egoism, just as much as selflessness, is in definite circumstances a necessary form of the self-assertion of individuals. Hence, the communists by no means want to do away with the private individual for the sake of the general selfless man. This is a statement of the imagination. Very clear, one would think, and yet you find that not only on YouTube and social media, but even amongst academics, this caricature of Marxism and communism and socialism continues to persist, that communism requires from humanity to be entirely selfless. Marx's own views, as you can very plainly and clearly see, are that it is part of human nature to be both selfless as well as selfish in different circumstances and depending on the situation and so on and so forth. In other words, it is neither part of human nature to be entirely selfish, nor is it part of human nature to be entirely selfless. Both being selfish and selfless are part of human nature. To give you an example, when we come together, we develop social relations, we want things from each other, that requires us to come together in some form of a social relation. It's possible that you may be able to build something, construct something, make something that I require, and I may be able to construct something, make something, build something that you require, in which case we have to develop a social relationship with each other. We have to our self-interest leads us to develop social relationships. But human needs go beyond the material things that you and I require. We also require, we don't just require the products that other people make. We also require other people to lead a normal, healthy, physically and psychologically healthy life. one of the great pleasures of life is to share an evening with a good friend, to be able to talk to a friend, to be able to tell them about your dreams, your aspirations, your fears, your hopes, your anxieties, and so on. To be able to communicate. And nothing else is demanded from the other side aside from a sympathetic air. It's not like anything material is desired from the other side. It feels good to be a good friend. And to be a good friend means often to put other people's interests before your own interests. To be in love with someone means that you put their interests over and above your own interests. You're not selfish with those that you love. And if you are selfish with those that you love, then you often find that love often wilts away. And it's the same with friendships. It's the same in the case of a relationship between parents and children. Parents just give and give and give to their children their entire lives. They give their labor, they give their time, they give their love, etc. That's a very normal part of the relationship. And then children do the same going forward, and often children will be very loving towards their parents, especially if they've had parents who have been loving towards them, and so on. So love and giving is very much part of human nature. We come together when we give things to each other, when we act in this way of selflessness, when we care for each other. We are being selfless when we care for each other. And that's a very important part of forming social bonds and coming together. On the other hand, there can be circumstances in which you are being asked to do something that is bad for you, and you are being continuously asked to do something and make sacrifices that it's not just that you don't want to do them, but in fact they are necessarily pulling you down, bringing you down and destroying you. For example, you could be in a toxic relationship where you're constantly giving in to the other person is constantly manipulating you, demanding things from you. It's a one-sided relationship. In such a situation, it's actually good to be selfish. It's actually good to say, no, these are my limits. This is what I require for myself. This is my time. I need this for myself. To say that you need something for yourself, of course, is a selfish act. It's an act of self-love. Doesn't mean that you're taking away something from someone else, but you may choose not to do something for someone else, but to do something for yourself. In which case, if you're doing something for yourself, you're doing it from the point of view that you will gain something from it, right? Which is a selfish act. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. As psychologists will tell you, it's very important to love yourself and to do what's right for yourself, while at the same time building relations with others. When a child is able to say no to his parents, that's when, or her parents, that's when a child really asserts their individuality. So saying no and saying, this is who I am, this is what I want, is very much part of the self-assertion of our individuality. And Marx and Engels are accepting that when they say very explicitly that that egoism is and even selfishness is the assertion of the self against others who may want things from you, and you are refusing to give them those things. And that's an important quality that one needs to possess in order to develop oneself as an individual. It's important to know when to be selfless and when to be selfish. More importantly, perhaps, what Marx is also looking at, and what we could also look at, is how we have treated this question in the context of advanced capitalist societies. If we look at classical liberalism, for example, we have people like Hobbes and Locke who think that in the state of nature, humanity will be fighting with each other. Hobbes says that it will be in the absence of a state, there will be war of all against all. Locke thinks that it won't be so bad, but certainly you'll have a situation where people want things that, two people may want the same thing, and this may cause a conflict, and you need a neutral arbiter in order to arbitrate in that conflict, which will be the state. This is classical liberalism, of course. If you've read it, you must know it. And also we have more recently, not just rational choice theory, which I mentioned earlier, which posits man as a utility maximizing machine, but you also have libertarian individualism, which thinks that there is no goal higher than the assertion of individuality and individual freedom, which somehow or the other is always conceived in contradiction to the rest of society and to the demands of society, to the demands of the collective. So this is a particular kind of configuration in which the individual is always in contradiction to other individuals and in contradiction to society. And this, of course, has a material foundation. The material foundation of this ideology that our freedoms are always being infringed upon by society and by others that we know. The material foundation of this is nothing other than the capitalist system. Within the capitalist system, you have competition at all levels of society. Workers have to compete with each other for jobs. Workers have to compete with each other on the job for a better pay, etc. Capitalists are competing with other capitalists, and in order to compete with other capitalists, they're often pushing down the wages of others. Groups of capitalists may be competing with other groups of capitalists. States are competing with other states for the monopolization of labor markets and raw materials. From the top to the bottom, what you see in capitalist society is competition everywhere. But no society can survive on the basis of just individual competition, because every kind of society requires certain kinds of collective actions. And where you have an ideology which only preaches that you should look out for yourself and no one else, you should not care about society, you're going to have a situation where society literally will break down, because you will not be able to organize any collective action. This is well recognized even amongst rational choice theorists who talk about the free rider problem or the collective action problem. So how is collective action solved in a capitalist society? It is solved through the ideology of nationalism. Make America great again. France is for the French, and Britain should become great again, and so on and so forth. Every society that you see has a very strong, I would say even virulent concept of nationalism, where you are supposed to put the interests of your country, your nation, your society before your individual interests. During times of war, it can reach a crescendo where people are asked to even sacrifice their lives for their country, which they do in big wars, which are often for the purpose of aggrandizing more territory, property, raw materials, markets, and so on and so forth. So in other words, in every capitalist society, you have two ideologies simultaneously present. On the one hand, you have this ideology that it's human nature to be selfish. Capitalism is based on greed and profit motive and selfishness, and there's nothing wrong with it, etc., etc. You hear this all the time. On the other hand, you have an equally strong ideology in all capitalist societies saying, talking about the state and the nation and the collective and so on, and the bigger interest and the bigger picture and so on and so forth. And yes, we are Americans and we are French and we are British and we are Pakistanis and we are Indians and so on and so forth, and we must sacrifice for our nation. Whether that means that we have to help people in natural disasters, or whether that means we have to help people through the coronavirus, let's say, or whether it means that we have to, we should come together for health and education, or it could mean things, or cleaning the streets or the environment or whatnot, or it could mean that we need to come together to defend ourselves against another country which is attacking us, or we need to make the world safer for democracy, etc., etc. So in other words, collective action often is organized by political elites via the ideology of nationalism. That's why you see in any given country both these doctrines existing simultaneously and in complete contradiction to each other, but because both are necessary in the way in which life in those societies are structured. Now what all of this leaves out, what this kind of rugged individualism, this atomistic individualism, classical liberalism, specifically Hobbes and Locke, etc., as well as the more modern kind of individualism that we see in rational choice theory, or we see in the context of libertarianism, etc. The central thing that all of these theories leave out is the idea that the fulfillment of our individual desires requires other people to cooperate with us. This is such a simple thing. The gaping hole is that a society built purely and only on individual selfishness and maximizing your own benefit and utility, etc., will experience a severe crisis of collective action. Collective action in every society, whether it's modern or primitive, is a necessary condition for societies to be cohesive. There are not hundreds, not thousands, but millions of instances in which we can benefit from undertaking a certain action, but we have been trained, we have been conditioned not to undertake that action. We have been told by our parents, by our teachers, by our schools, by the media, by the society, don't do this, don't break the traffic light, don't do this, don't throw trash on the street, don't litter, etc., etc., don't be rude, don't spit on the street, and so on and so forth, right? So why do we then do all of those things? We do those things because we are conditioned, we are brought up with certain values, and we try our best to obey those values. In other words, we don't try to maximize utility. In fact, the way in which humans generally tend to live is that they are brought up with certain values. Many of those values contradict each other, but we try to live within the values that we have been brought up in. So I think that's a far more nuanced way of understanding the role that values play in our society. So to sum up, it is not the case that socialism argues that it can be established, communism, socialism can be established. A new society can be established merely if we all decide one day, we wake up one day and we decide that we're not going to be selfish anymore. This is rubbish. Okay? This exists only in the imagination of those people who have never read socialism. Nor is it the case that once a socialist society will be constructed, we will all become completely selfless. That's also not going to happen. We're always going to be people who, let's say, experience a certain tension between what we want to do for others and what we want to do for ourselves. And that will always exist in the human psyche, irrespective of the economic system, the mode of production. Nor is it the case that in the current society as it already exists, in capitalist society, we can only go around being selfish and we don't ever have to be selfless. That's not the case, certainly. That's not how we are brought up. That's not what we are taught. That's not what we are bombarded with daily through Hollywood and other mass media. We are bombarded daily with people who sacrifice themselves, with heroes and superheroes and movies about people who sacrifice themselves to save all of mankind, or save their society, or save their country, or fight evil, etc., etc. So we are bombarded with that at the same time as we are bombarded with the idea that being selfish is all right. So this contradiction is the result of the peculiar way in which capitalist society is constructed. And what Marx and Engels think is that this apparent contradiction will not disappear, but certainly even itself out a little more, be resolved when society moves from the capitalist system to the socialist system, or to the communist system rather, which is an even more advanced kind of society. Because in that society, in a communist society where we do not experience the exploitation of one class by another class, there the development of the individual will not come at the expense of the development of other individuals, as it does in the current society. Because in capitalist society, wealth can only be accumulated at the expense of people working for those corporations, because according to Marx, wealth is really the accumulation of exploited labor power. And in this society, in current society, capital and wealth does give you individuality. It does give you greater freedom. But now that is a freedom that comes at the expense of others. Just as the freedom of certain countries in this society comes at the expense of the freedom of other societies, as we saw in the instance of slavery and colonialism and neo-imperialism and so on. Just as your freedom may come at the expense of pushing another worker aside in order to get that job. So in other words, all of these contradictions will be incredibly decreased, which are, these contradictions that are arising from the economic mode of production will be resolved in a communist society where this competition over economic resources will come to an end. So you have in communist society a situation where the individual may assert themselves out of self-love, but that assertion in the way in which communist society is set up will not come at the expense of, at the cost of other people. It will not be the result that I will develop my individuality by exploiting or destroying the individuality of other people, but rather that our individualities will be able to benefit from each other and grow together. And in that way, the contradiction between the self and the collective, between the individual and the collective, will have resolved to a higher level, a higher Hegelian level, let's say. Hope you enjoyed that lecture. Sorry, it went on for a little longer than I expected, but do subscribe and like and share and all of that stuff. And I'll try and produce more material in the English language for all the people who cannot follow Urdu, etc. Thank you for being so patient and asking again and again, requesting that I produce more material in English. I'll produce more from now on. Thank you so much.